Just even say, hey, it's been too long. And you can even say, I was listening to a podcast where someone said I should really do this, and I've been meaning to and just been held back because I felt awkward about it. And I think by and large, you're going to really enjoy what happens.
Welcome back to the Own Your Awkward podcast. I'm your host, Andy Vargo, and every episode we get into what has made our guests vulnerable and how they've learned how to own their awkward in order to live their best life. Stay tuned so you can hear every awkward moment in today's show. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Own Your Awkward. We are going to get so awkward in a couple minutes. I am just honored and excited to have Reuben Swartz here today. And Reuben is the founder and CEO of Mimiran. It's not your typical CRM software, which I have been using lately and loving. And we're going to hear about that after we hear about his awkward. So make sure you check out all this stuff because it's a completely different way of looking at things. He is also the host and the chief nerd of the Sales for Nerds podcast. Reuben, how are you? Thanks for being here today.
I'm great, Andy. Thanks so much for having me.
I appreciate it. Just for our listeners, Reuben and I met, maybe 6 or 7 months ago, this last year at the NLV conference hosted by the amazing Sarah Elkins, and just hit it off. And I'm so grateful for everything I've learned from you, the guidance, the challenges. It's been fun.
Awesome. Yeah, Sarah's great. She's also been a guest on my podcast, and it was wonderful to meet her and you and so many other cool people in person. That was my first in-person business trip since before COVID.
Wow. I'm pleasure to have been on that one with you then, because it was great. So Reuben, I'm curious. I always like to kind of just start out with something a little different. And I'm wondering, what's the most positive thing you see going on in the world right now?
I think there's a ton of good stuff that happens, and we tend to accentuate the bad stuff, especially in the media. It's what sells. Sure. And I think, to be fair, there's a lot of pretty bad stuff happening that we should actually be keeping an eye on and trying to fix. Right. But at the same time, there's a lot of great stuff happening that maybe doesn't make the headlines the same way, and it doesn't invite the same vitriol and all that online. But every day there are good people doing good things for each other, helping each other out, pushing the world forward and in a good direction. And I think sometimes it's easy to think that it's all doom and gloom, because that's what we're supposed to be thinking according to the sort of crazy echo chamber that we live in the modern world.
Right. Yeah, I love that you are noticing that there is good. It just isn't getting called out, and it's everyday people doing all sorts of stuff.
One of the best things for me, my family insisted on getting a dog during the pandemic, and everyone made a lot of promises, as they usually do, about who is going to take turns taking care of the dog. And let's be very clear, this is my dog. And so I don't always appreciate that when I'm, out walking her when it's 105 degrees or it's sleeting or whatever. But one thing I notice is when I'm out walking with my dog, the world is generally pretty good. Like, she's having a great time smelling things. I'm waving and saying hi to neighbors and people driving by, and all kinds of stuff that's very different than my world behind this screen.
Yeah.
And so I'm very grateful, as she's napping over here right now, to have this wonderful dog who helps me see some of the good stuff going on.
I love that perspective, that just having the companion by your side forces you, for one thing, to go take those walks where it's easy for us to throw that out the window and go, I got all this stuff to do, I can't take the walk today. Yep. And the dog needs the walk. You have to take the dog out. You can't say no to that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Unless you're my kids.
Right. Then it becomes dad's dog.
Yep.
Right. I love that. Well, Reuben, the world wants to know. We got you here. We got to find out, what's your awkward thing? What's that thing you've had to own in order to live this awesome life you're living?
Well, we only have a limited amount of time, so we can't go into the full list, Andy. But I think probably the thing that stands out for me in my story, and that will probably be pretty amusing to people listening, is I was a sales and marketing consultant for Fortune 500 companies. And I was pretty good at helping them with their sales and marketing. And I was absolutely freaking horrendous at my own sales and marketing.
Okay.
And I made this worse in a way that I think is funny and really relates to a lot of the work you do. I realized that I need help. I'm not good at this stuff. That's fine. But I'm getting paid good money to sit in rooms with some of the top sales and marketing people on the planet. So all I have to do is like take good notes and do what they do, right? I just have to copy them.
Right.
It seemed
Sounds
like a
that
good
easy, right?
plan. It
It
was an
sounds simple.
absolute disaster. Like I just made it worse because I wasn't those people.
Mm,
I was trying to show up as someone else instead of showing up as me.
mm,
And it was just, it was brutal. And it actually informs my whole mission now, which is helping people who are not sales and marketing people, right? They're consultants. They do their thing that they do to help their clients. And they often don't really like the sales and marketing piece of what they do, right? As you
right.
might be familiar with. And like me, they often go through this thought process of, oh, I've got to learn to be like a salesperson. I've got to learn to be a slick marketer and all that. And I'm like, no, you don't. Show up as yourself, hopefully a professional, helpful version of yourself, and things will be good. But I spent years trying to impersonate, a Fortune 500 sales rep, if you will,
Right.
and that was just like shooting myself in the foot. Like I was obviously inauthentic, so people are like, "Hey, what's going on?" People
Mm,
just have a barrier when you show up and you're sort of got a facade. People can tell you're hiding something, and for me, it was just my awkwardness. Like I wasn't trying to do anything bad,
right.
but people can pick up on that mask,
Hmm.
and they think there's something shady going on because you're not being true to yourself. And secondly, it was exhausting for me to try to like be someone that I wasn't. And third, it wasn't very effective anyway. Like it was much more effective for me to show up and be like the dorky, excited engineer.
Hmm.
Like, let's talk about what you got going on. How is everybody? And then get into problem solving mode, which is kind of where I live. And lo and behold, that's much more fun, much easier, more effective. People are like, oh, okay, I understand you, Reuben. Like you're not hiding who you are.
Yeah. Now, in a second, I want to ask you about what this turned into, but I'm curious, was there a moment that made you realize you had that disconnect where you're taking your notes from the meetings and you're like showing up going, I'm going to be the Fortune 500 guy, and then was there just was it a compilation of rejection after rejection, or was there one moment where someone said something and you went, I'm doing it wrong?
You know, I would like to think that I was smart enough to like observe what is so painfully obvious now. But no, it was like the fish in the fishbowl, like asked to describe the water. It was just like I was too immersed in it, and it was more like somebody described this to me. It's not necessarily a light switch; it's more like a dimmer switch, and like gradually you get enlightened. And you're like, wait a second, this is my company. I can do things the way I want to do them.
Hmm.
And I noticed that sometimes I would sort of forget that I was in a sales call, if you will. It's like, oh, Ruben, you got to meet Andy. You and Andy would really hit it off. And I think he needs your help, blah, 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 blah. And you'd go and just talk and have a great time. And then good things would happen. And next thing you know, you're sending a proposal and you're doing a fun project and blah, blah, blah. And there were other things where I was like, pulling out my bookshelf here, had all these sales books, 10 ways to be a top 10 sales rep and all that stuff. And, 19 objection handling techniques. And I was like, furiously reviewing and thinking, oh, I got to like overcome this and convince them of that and whatever. And those were painful and sucked. And there was one meeting I had, I remember, where I was out to dinner with a prospect and we were just having a great time chit chatting. And then at one point, I accidentally kind of like shifted into sales mode. And the whole conversation, it was like the record scratch happened.
Oh, yeah.
And that was as close as like one light bulb moment. I was like, well,
Right.
wait a second. Like, I know I was trying to like do the right thing, but I just kind of ruined it. Like,
Like I just
why
killed
did
the
I do
moment.
that?
Oh no. Yeah. I think that's where we find the lessons, right? Like we have that situation happen, and if we're aware enough, even if we don't catch it in the moment, at least afterwards we can say, okay, well, next time I won't do that.
Right.
Yeah. And that's one thing that I have loved about working with you and your approach and with Mimiran. I love the E in your acronym, your mega acronym. And if not to give away your secret sauce here, but it's
Please give it away.
easy. Ruben has a mega acronym to help you remember how your sales process should be. And I'm butchering here, but tell us about that. Because I think it really relates to what you've developed from your journey.
Well, okay. So let me see if I can recontextualize this as briefly and helpfully as possible. I talked earlier about like those really fun meetings where I didn't feel
Mhm.
like I was selling anything, right? Maybe it was a perfect referral or it was a great client saying, "Hey, Reuben, we want to do the other division now," kind of thing. And then contrast that with the really like arduous slog up the mountain with little oxygen and
Right.
all that, right? And what I realized was usually the easy ones were great fit clients, great fit prospects. So it was just a matter of like, okay, let's figure out how we're going to solve this problem together. And the ones that were arduous were not necessarily because they were bad people or I was a bad person. It just wasn't the right fit.
Right.
And I knew because I help my clients with this all the time. It's like, let's get really specific about who your ideal customer is,
Hmm.
because those are the ones that, they're going to buy quickly and they're going to pay full price and blah, 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 right? And of course, they would say, well, we've got, 18 different segments that we serve and we have to serve all of them and blah, 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 blah. And, when it came to my own business, like a lot of us, I was like, but I'm a special snowflake. Like I have many niches.
Right.
Um, and
All of your simple programs won't work for my super complicated, unique thing that never been
absolutely
done anywhere, right?
nobody has ever had a business like this before. And so, and I knew I was doing this because I like to think I'm this rational person. And I couldn't figure out why I was having so much trouble actually getting over it. And I realized later that it's kind of like they talk about the lizard brain, which isn't really a thing, but there is a sort of a more primitive brain and there's our cortex. And it's very hard to use your cortex to get out of a problem that's lower in your brainstem.
Sure.
And I think for a lot of us, we have this fear as we get tighter with our niche that we're missing out on opportunities, people we could serve, maybe people we have served in the past. And that's like a lizard brain problem. It's not a cortex problem.
Gotcha.
Because rationally, we know, hey, there's still thousands of people in this super focused niche, and I can never serve all of them, even
Right.
if I live to be 200, right? Like it's not a problem, but the
Hmm.
lizard brain doesn't like missing out. And so the way I tricked my lizard brain was to say, rather than a small versus large market, do I want my sales and marketing to be easy or hard?
Ah,
And
well,
so the idea is, well, of course, we want it to be easy, right? Most of us don't like extra challenges with sales and marketing.
hmm.
And so whenever I feel myself getting that lizard brain tingle of missing out, I'm like, well, wait a second. I think I'm making sales and marketing harder for myself. And that's another lizard brain issue, right? Like I hate that. I
Yeah.
want to make it easy. So the lizard brains can battle it out and leave the cortex to do its thing. That's the E part of mega. And the idea is to use quote unquote mega positioning as a lever to do a lot of the sales and marketing work for us. So M is for magnetic. And the challenge here is when you have a magnet, we want to sort of attract everybody and not push anyone away. And that doesn't work. Magnets have two poles that are the same strength. So if you want to really powerfully attract your ideal clients, you have to kind of let everyone else know that they need to go down the hall, they need to go somewhere else.
Hmm.
And we don't like to do that, right? That's a lizard brain saying, well, but I could help them. But there's plenty of people for us to help if we attract our ideal clients, and we can't attract them powerfully without pushing the folks away. And then the other benefit of this, which kind of goes into the whole sales thing that I was having so much struggle with, is a lot of those conversations were conversations I never should have been in.
Mm.
Like it should have been obvious that we weren't a fit before we even got on each other's calendars. Or
Hmm.
if we had the initial meeting, okay, great. 5 minutes in, we're not a good fit. I suggest you talk to so-and-so
Yeah.
instead of, 3 meetings later, sometimes getting on an airplane and going and blah, 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 blah. So how do you do this? That's where G comes in. G means gorilla, 800-pound gorilla. And as a solo person, we often think, well, I'm not the 800-pound gorilla, right? I'm the tiny little ant
Right.
watching out for the 800-pound gorillas. That's because we're playing on their field. We want to define our market so that we can be the 800-pound gorilla within it, right? Even if there's only 10 people or 100 people or 1,000 or some relatively small number of people in that market, if we are the 800-pound gorilla in it, we're the natural choice. And that's kind of a good way for you to know, have I established a market of the right size to make things easy, right? Is there a market where I'm the 800-pound gorilla? If not, you got to go tighter.
Mm.
And
Okay.
then A, which maybe should stand for awkward. Like that would be kind of fun for this conversation. But it like for me, it stands for authentic. And part of that is being awkward, right? Like, because
Right.
everyone has different levels of awkward, maybe me more than some, but everyone has some awkwardness. And we can't get rid of that. One of the things that I screwed up was trying to be so polished, like sort of like this I don't know, Hollywood version of a sales rep. Like I wasn't going to be unethical, but I was going to be smooth and like not too emotional, not too awkward, for lack
Right.
of a better term, right? In other
Mhm.
words, totally unlike myself. And so get into the meetings and it's like, how can they relate to somebody who's got a facade on,
When there's no person,
right?
when you
If
don't get a genuine personality, you don't even know what
right,
to trust.
you have to show up as authentic, right? So I was trying to show up as what I thought a sales rep was supposed to show up like, a conscientious one, like someone who's genuinely trying to help their clients and all that. Not like the used car salesman or Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross, but somebody
Right.
I was not. And
Mhm.
so I realized later when I like let myself actually show up, people could talk and have a good time. And the people who like talking to me and hanging out with me, who would mesh well with me, would say, "Hey, Reuben, this is great. Really enjoyed. Blah blah blah. Want to work with you, etc." People who don't like me, well, gosh, imagine worst case scenario, I win that deal, and then we have to work together for a few months,
Right.
right? Like
Yeah.
that's a disaster.
Right. Yeah. And that's such a good point because if we're chasing things that are not the best fit, the reward is now you're working with something that's not the best fit. And that's not easy. That's not fun. It's more work. The whole thing is just, it's better if you click and then work becomes fun.
Absolutely.
One thing that I think has been interesting, at least for myself, learning this approach. The first thing was that I don't know why A was always the hardest one for me to remember when I'm going through. Wait, what's the acronym? I'm like, oh, that's right, authentic. Because I want to go to awkward or whatever, but it's like, oh no, that should be the easy part. But one of the things that's been the most difficult has been to unlearn how complicated we try to make things. Like even explaining to people what Mimiran does and the approach of having like you always say, you have conversations and good things will happen. Like it should be that simple. And when I'm going through it myself, it's like, wait, I just need to stop overcomplicating all the things to put into the process or all the stuff. Just talk to people, see if we fit, and move along one way or the other.
Well, I think the two-step process is figuring out exactly who you want to talk to,
Right.
right? And
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 that's
then have the conversations, because I think there's a lot of us who kind of go through this phase of, okay, gosh, I need to go meet a whole bunch of people. And I
mhm,
know they're not all going to be prospects or referral partners, but I just need to meet as many people as I can because I don't know enough people, right?
right.
And then you have a whole bunch of unproductive meetings that you're sort of like even subconsciously trying to force to be productive,
Yeah.
and it's just like, this sucks, and then you don't want to do it, right? It's like going to the gym and you don't enjoy the gym, versus if you can get, even if you're not perfectly dialed in, you get like some notion. The more you're dialed in, the more high quality those conversations are going to be, not necessarily with prospects, but just people like, oh,
Mhm.
you also work with so and so type of folks. What do you think about blah 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 blah? And before you know it, you're having fun because you have a shared interest and you have a shared mission. Or I like to think of it, you're kind of touching different parts of the same elephant. If you're helping the same audience, you have got similar philosophies, etc. And the tighter that positioning is, the more you're going to have those fun conversations. As an introvert, this was the mind blowing thing for me, because I was trying to impersonate a sales rep. So I would force myself to like get on the phone and call people and all. And it was like, oh, and it like headaches and neck tension and all that
Right.
stuff.
It's painful.
Literally painful. And now it's like I spend most of my day on Zoom or on the phone with people. And generally speaking, I have a blast
Hmm. Yeah.
because they're people that I like talking to mostly, right? If they're not, then I just don't talk to them anymore. But I'm very comfortable being able to say, hey, we're not going to talk anymore, because I know there's other people for me to talk to.
Right. Yeah.
When it's just like, oh, I haven't done anything for business development, and someone gave me this one referral that's kind of not a great referral, but I feel like I got to go pursue it, right?
Mhm.
That's where we get awkward, if I may say
Yeah.
so.
Fair. So, so when you kind of discovered, that dimmer switch was coming on, and all of a sudden the light is happening, and you're stepping into this authentic, easier way to work. How quickly was that transition? Was there like oh, I'm just stepping out here, or was it, this got a little better, this got a little better?
You know, it's so simple, but it took me years.
Mm.
And in my mission out, like it took me years. And then I realized that I wasn't alone in this. There's a lot of us who kind of end up in this position. And I realized that in some ways I was part of the problem. I was part of the sales and marketing industrial complex that sells to big companies. And
Mm-hmm.
I like to think, does a good job, but sort of it's sort of like the media landscape we talked about in the beginning. Like, oh, if you have sales and marketing problems, here's how you handle it.
Right.
And that's not necessarily true. It's not that it's wrong. It's just if you try to take that advice and apply it to a solo business or even a small business, it's going to not just be frustrating, it's going to be counterproductive, right? It's like, hey, here are the steps to go into the grocery store. Step one isn't like roll your space shuttle to the launch pad.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what a lot of the sales and marketing advice is about. And you're right, it's like we make it way more complicated than it needs to be. And as an engineer who's introverted, who doesn't like sales, this was like music to my ears. I was like, let's get things complicated. Let's have fancy marketing automation and all this crap so I don't have to talk to people, right? Like I thought that was the holy grail.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized after a long time that no, I just want to have fun conversations with the right people. And then good things are going to happen. And I'm actually going to enjoy myself. And it's going to create a virtuous cycle.
Right. So, so how has this affected your life? I mean, outside of obviously it's made the conversations easier, but has it made it possible to close sales? Has the end become better? Has are you less stressed at home? Like how does just being yourself make life different for you?
Gosh, I mean, you would probably have a better list than me, but I can think just off the top of my head. Yes, it's much more effective for sales,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you allow yourself not just to show up as who you are for the conversations, but to show up as yourself in your positioning and be real clear on your website, your LinkedIn, whatever other online presence you have, and with your referral partners, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like here's exactly the kind of people that I help and why, right? So it's very easy for them to say, oh, you should talk to Andy. You shouldn't talk to so-and-so, the head of IBM or whatever, right? Like that's not going to be a good fit for you. So that makes all that easier. And then like getting to the end of the day and thinking, gosh, I'm kind of energized. Like that was fun. So now I got to go walk the dog. I got to make dinner for my kids. I got to hang out with my wife. I got to do all these other things instead of like, oh my gosh, like
Right.
I hate this.
Right.
I'm in a bad mood when I
Mm-hmm.
go, pick up my kids from school or something like that. Instead, being in a generally, I like to think generally good mood. You can maybe ask my family if that's really true, but I think it's definitely better with this mindset.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that because how often do we hear about relationships eroding or family life being stressful because we have given the best part of our energy from our day to our jobs. We get up, we get out the door early. Some of us might hit the gym in the morning, but we've done all those things, and then by the time it gets to be 5 o'clock and we deal with a commute and we get home, and then it's chores and expectations and time that we would like to think if we sat down and said, what are your values and priorities? You'd say, I want to spend time with my family. I want this to be the most important part of my day. But just out of the nature of how we're living, sometimes we've zapped all of that. So to hear you say that you finish that part of your day and instead of bringing you down, it's built you up. And now you're like, wow, what's next? I think that's
Especially for an introvert, it's crazy, right? And
right.
it's very different than what it used to be because I used to have that like pain in my neck and like, argh.
Yeah. And I think that's important too that you do mention being an introvert because I have a lot of introverts that listen. One of the most common things I've had people say is being introverted has been something they've had to, find a way to work with as they're awkward. And so a lot of times we see someone out there having success, or especially in sales, where you think, oh, they must be extroverted, that must be their
Mhm.
thing, because your personality is not tied to where you're getting that charge, and so it's not easy to tell sometimes who's pulling from where.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And that was a struggle that I went through for a long time. I was like, oh, I got to be like sort of that like ex-football player, extrovert, glad
Mhm.
handing example of a salesperson. And that's exhausting because that's not who I am. And I mean, like trade shows were just the worst and just terrible, right? It totally zapped my energy and all that sort of classic introverted way. But thing is, I have way more conversations now than I did then.
Mm-hmm.
but I'm doing it intentionally and more or less on my terms. And I think what I realize is there's sort of this notion that conversations zap introverts energy and they feed extroverts energy. I don't think that's true. I think the wrong kind of conversations in the wrong settings zap anyone's energy. We just
Right.
have different notions about what that means when you're introverted or extroverted. And if you're introverted, it's kind of like the golden age right now because we've got Zoom, we've got all these technologies, CRMs, et cetera, to like help you have conversations on your terms.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, speaking of CRM, let's hear a little bit about Mimiran. When we met, it was an interesting just observation because you gave a presentation about positioning at NLV and about how to kind of position yourself. I got to be a guinea pig and get picked on a little bit in that situation, which was good for me. I was like, oh, don't say my name, don't pick me. But it was really good that happened. Sarah knows the room really well, and she's like, Andy could use help on this. I'm like, oh, like thank you, but no, thank you. But it was funny because I had it in my head like, here's Reuben, this engineer kind of guy. He's built this techie thing. So I'm picturing someone who's focused on the technical side, the behind the scenes, the IT. And yet you're just a whiz at the sales process. So that blew me away when you're like leading the conversation on how to approach sales. And that's one thing that has been such a benefit from knowing you, and that Mimiran, it from my perspective, it's almost designed from a techie engineer aspect to drive sales and not just track activity. And it's so hard to explain to people when I tell them I'm working with the software, like, well, does it do this? Does it this? I'm like, well, it's not really for that. It's for this. And so I'd love to hear you explain, share about it, tell us how you got there and what it's the best parts of it.
Well, clearly, I need to be doing a better job of my own messaging, right? If I'm not empowering people like you to describe it in a way that's compelling to other people, like I'm not doing something right. So, anyone listening right now should probably stop because obviously I'm not good at practicing this.
Not at all.
But I think for a long time, I started building tools to plug into a CRM because I thought the problem with the CRMs I was using was that they lacked certain things I needed. Like I wanted to know when people were reading my proposal. I wanted to have a better way to get leads off my website and so on. And I figured I was just not using the CRMs right. And then I was telling some folks about what I had built, and they were like, that sounds really cool. Can I have that? So I took this little thing that I had built for myself and I turned it into an app, which was a fun thing for a techie like me to do. And then people started saying, I really love Mimiran. It's simple, it's easy, it does what it says, and I hate my CRM. Can you just make Mimiran do the CRM stuff too? And of course, I said no. That would be absurd. The world doesn't need another CRM, and if it did, I'd be the last person who should build it because I hate CRMs. Right? I've tried dozens of them, and I hate them all, just to varying degrees. And they were like, "That's why you should do this." And eventually, I was like, I remember I was sitting trying to do something with a tool that shall not be named that just seemed like it should be really easy, and it just wasn't. And I was like, I just want an easy way to stay in touch with people and have good conversations with people. Like it shouldn't be this hard.
Right.
And again, really obvious in hindsight to see that CRMs are built as a general product category. They're built for the VP of sales to keep track of the sales team.
Right.
And the extra level of irony for me was I knew how bad they were at this because as a consultant, we pulled data out of the CRMs and it was generally kind of crappy because the reps would put in the minimum amount of data. Well, they ran their actual business off of a spreadsheet or something.
Right.
And they would like copy and paste some stuff in right before the deal would close. And that doesn't mean that CRMs are bad or that the VP of sales wanting to keep track of the sales team are bad. Like that's a perfectly natural thing to want to do.
Mm-hmm.
But and again, I was just too close to it to see like this is why whenever I used a CRM and I'm sort of like acting as the VP of sales and the sales rep and the marketing analyst and the chief marketing officer, and I'm doing all of this in my spare time and I hate all of it. Right. So like this is just like adding misery to something at an extra degree of difficulty that I just don't want. So the idea for me is just like, let's make it as easy as possible to have good conversations with the right people. And if someone says, hey, this sounds great, can we work together? Make it really easy to send them a proposal and make all that part really easy all the way through e-signature. And then a lot of what we were talking about earlier about the mega positioning, one of the things I realized people were having trouble with the lead magnet piece of the tool, right? How to get leads from their website. And they didn't say, I have no idea who my ideal client is. They were too close to it like me. But
Which
I realized
I'm raising my hand. That was me, where I'm just like, I don't even know what to say. Like someone who needs a speaker to come talk to him.
right.
How bad is that? Right?
Well, it's not necessarily that it's bad, but it makes it really hard to create something compelling because it just sounds like everything else,
Right.
as opposed to showing up as you for
Mhm.
your ideal client and then being able to give your unique perspective. And what was funny is kind of like with me, if you would sit down and chat with these people, especially after a drink or two, like it was amazing. Like they had all these cool stories and it could tell you exactly why the folks they helped, why they were in so much trouble beforehand because the normal approaches didn't work for them and so on. And then they came in and they did blah, 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 blah. And then you go to their website or you ask them to create a lead magnet and it's all like, we are here to give you excellent service and exceed your expectations. And so that's where the idea of having that mission and positioning wizard came from. And I think it's the only CRM that has something like that, because usually the VP of sales says, here's your positioning, right? Here are your talking
Right.
points. But when it's your business, you have to /get to come up with that yourself. So the idea is, if we can do that, then everything else gets exponentially easier
Mm-hmm.
and more fun and so on. And if we don't do a good job with that, everything gets exponentially harder. And I spent years doing it the hard way, which was not a good idea.
Uh-huh.
I don't enjoy sales and marketing being hard. I want it to be easy. So let's make it really easy. And then I think something else that's kind of fun for, especially for the solo crowd, is I like to think of us as we're solo, but we don't have to be alone. So
Mm-hmm.
you can connect with other users, like Andy and I are connected on our dashboards. So
Right.
I can see how many conversations is Andy having this week and how many am I having. And it's just kind of
Right.
like having a little workout buddy to just encourage you when you're teetering on the edge of going to the gym. Like, well, crap, Andy's ahead of me.
Right. And there is something to that, because there are times where I open up the dashboard and it's like, oh, I don't have anything logged in, but I know I've had conversations, and just that is enough. But once I get into logging them, I'm putting the information there that I do need to have, because normally I have this little notebook and I'm putting my conversations in the notebook, but then you change notebooks, once you fill it up, or you've got to go through randomly and figure out what day did I have that conversation with that person. And this way I can go up, I can click on Reuben, I can see, oh, we talked here, we could talk here. And if I try to remember what was that thing that we talked about, what was the circumstances surrounding this thing, what were we going to do with it, I can search and go find
Yeah.
that topic and be like, that's that was supposed to be my next step. And I may have forgotten it, but it's there.
Yeah. And you probably have better handwriting than me. Like I still have a little black notebook and a lot of my notes end up there. But at the end of the day, I sweep them into the system so that one, I can just read them later. And
Right.
then being able to search them and make sure I have my to-dos captured, it takes me a few minutes at the end of the day, but it saves me hours and hours and who knows how much money because I haven't like let something just
Mhm.
disappear. And then I notice also that I think I go to bed easier because all those things like, hey, did I remember blah 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 blah,
Right.
right? It's like I know that I've gone through and processed things and put things on my to-do list or whatever I need to do.
Yeah. And that is the thing. It lowers your stress level because you have this companion that's kind of keeping you on track. And the best part is I'm not going to forget to call that person back, because when I'm supposed to, it pops up and it says, "Hey, you're supposed to talk to these people in the next week." You look at your agenda, or you can either look at what's ahead, or you just see, "Oh, here's today's list." So I got to get that on the calendar if I didn't already have it set. So I know that it won't be that situation where, oh crap, I meant to talk to Reuben, but it's been 6 months and I meant to talk to him after a month, because
Right.
whatever we were working on, and now the follow-up fell through on my end because that's the thing that I'm the worst at. So it's really like having that kind of personal assistant nudging you, keeping you on track at the same time.
That's awesome. That makes me happy to hear. That's the whole idea. And I
And
think for most of us, it's like we have like we like to think we make it really hard and complicated, like, oh, I couldn't possibly do all the sales and marketing stuff. But most of us who are good at serving clients, like that is what you need to do the sales and marketing effectively if
yeah,
you channel that expertise and energy in the right way. And I know I spent years chasing my tail and trying to do other things instead of let me just teach instead of market, and help instead of sell, and connect instead of network, right? All these things that like are actually fun for me if I think of them that way. And they're
Right.
much more effective because that's what people want, right? They don't want to be sold or marketed to.
Right. And yeah, and that's the thing is when if you would have asked me when I was younger if I was going to be a salesperson when I grew up, I was like, no way, that is the least noble profession. There's no way of doing that. And my first month on the job when I got hired as a salesperson, I'd been in grocery and coffee and that whole side of things. And I went to work for one of our suppliers in sales. And the first month was our big sales meeting, and Jack Carew was there giving the keynote. And he's like, sales, it's the most noble of all professions. And like, what? Like, you're helping people, like, no matter. And it really did shift my mind. And I went through the whole journey of not being a good salesman and trying to be canned and trying to check all the boxes, to where this year has been my focus for the year has really been to hone my sales process, but not from the traditional way, in this more enlightened way of, okay, just follow up and have conversations. So it's helpful. And I would say that I am better at explaining Mimiran now that I've worked with it for a few months, where I can actually say, hey, this is what it does. This is why it's so good for me. And if you are, trying to set up an enterprise system for a VP of sales to micromanage, probably not the best fit.
Nope, please don't.
Yeah.
Don't drag me into that.
Right. So what is the best way for people to find you and support you and find out more?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I think I'm one of the few Reuben Swartzes, maybe the only one. I don't know. And of course, you can find out a lot more at mimiran.com, MIMIRAN.com. I've got a bunch of free resources there, like proposal templates and lead magnet concepts and, website checklists and so on.
Awesome. And there are links to all of those things right below, including Reuben's LinkedIn profile. So just click there, click the link to Mimiran, check it out. There's a little, it's super easy. It's the best thing. I wanted to get into a CRM, and honestly, Sarah's been telling me about Mimiran for like probably 3 years now. Like, oh, I use this one, it's the best. I was like, I'm just not ready to commit. I got to figure it out. And then, it's one of those things where I'm like, man, if I would have been doing this 2 years ago, how much further would I have been ahead? However, we all end up where we're at the right time. So,
well, thanks, Andy. I really appreciate the kind words, and thanks for having me on.
Definitely. Before we go, what advice would you give people for something they could do this week to own their awkward?
I think almost everybody has some conversation that they know they should have that they're putting off because they feel awkward, especially if it's been a long time since you've talked to that person. And then we get into this vicious cycle of, gosh, it's been 6 months, so I feel bad calling now, or it's been a year, it's been 2 years, whatever, right? Like it keeps getting worse and worse. And as an introvert who tried to force myself out of this, I'd say just give that person a call and just even say, hey, it's been too long. And you can even say, I was listening to a podcast where someone said I should really do this, and I've been meaning to and just been held back because I felt awkward about it. And I think by and large, you're going to really enjoy what happens.
I love that. That's such a good call to action. And I love that you point out that we all have that, right? And the phone goes both ways. So as much as you haven't called the person, they're going to be glad to hear you call at some point, because usually when I've had to say that, oh, it's been too long, the reaction is, I know, me too. And we kind of go into this, well, let's not make it so long next time. But it's rewarding if you can just get past that awkwardness and do it.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Reuben. It's been amazing. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to more conversations after this and more journey in the whole making things mega easy and actually authentic. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy.
And everybody else, be sure to go out there this week, make life easy, make those phone calls, and as always, own your awkward. Thank you so much for listening in for today's show. Be sure to visit awkwardcareer.com to continue your journey. And of course, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends so they can find their awkward side and learn how to own it.